where decision making is participatory, equitable, and inclusive. It means putting human rights and fairness at the core of climate action, ensuring that disadvantaged groups can seek remedies for damage they have been affected or they have suffered. At the Mobius Foundation, we are deeply committed to raising awareness about these challenges. No discussion on climate change is complete without addressing the social justice concern of the vulnerable communities. As we look toward the future, we must integrate these growing social concerns into evolving landscape of India's climate and environmental laws. We aim to create a platform for progressive exchange of ideas and hope that through our efforts we can contribute to advancing legal thought in India. Mobius, I would like to bring it to the knowledge of the audience, and we are happy to say that Mobius Foundation is also partnering with Warner Brothers Discovery Channel on a groundbreaking 10-episode documentary series. So we'll come out with 10 episodes which will talk about the planetary boundaries in context of India, how they are being breached, how individuals, communities, how the institutions can contribute to retract the damage which has been done to the environment. A special episode will also be dedicated to the crucial environmental issue of population growth. In Mobius Foundation, we believe that behind all these, or most of the problems is the high population. We are already the largest populated country in the world with only 2.4% of the land of the world. So we should strive to build a future where no community bears a disproportionate burden of the climate crisis, a future where the dignity and rights of all people are protected, and where we live in harmony with ecosystems that sustain us. I hope that with this event, we will make a significant contribution towards the emerging field of climate change and environmental law. Thank you. So I've read this speech on behalf of Mr. Government. Thank you so much.
I'd now like to invite our Chief Guest, Honorable Ms. Justice Hima Kohli, for a special address. Ma'am, whatever you're comfortable with, if you'd like to come to the podium or sit on the dais. Very good evening to all of you. For a climate change subject, what could be a better environment than the one we are in? Surrounded with a beautiful green trees and a blue sky, as blue as it can be in a Delhi conditions. It feels good to be out in the open in the evening, and I'm glad that the organizers decided to choose this venue for this symposium. Distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed delighted to address this symposium on climate liability, justice and jurisprudence, organized by the joint initiative of Mobius and ELD Foundation. The event provides a valuable platform for us to discuss our collective efforts towards broadening the reach and the efficacy of various institutions, including the judiciary, on a matter of immense significance, climate liability, and the role of justice in shaping climate jurisprudence. Climate change is no longer a looming threat. It is a present-day reality that has affected every aspect of human life, from health and livelihood to peace and security. The increasing frequency of extreme weather events, of melting glaciers, of rising sea levels, and the loss of biodiversity underscore the urgency with which this crisis must be addressed by us. While climate science has advanced remarkably, the solution to climate change are not solely scientific or technological. They must also be legal and political. The judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court of India, has been pivotal in this context. Over the years, it has consistently stepped in to address environment issues and created a body of jurisprudence that now forms India's cornerstone of environmental protection. However, as we grapple with the challenges posed by climate change, interventions by the courts must extend beyond traditional environmental concerns to encompass the broad implications of climate justice and liability. The role of Indian judiciary in environmental protection can be traced back to the 1980s when the Supreme Court began to expand the scope of Article 21 of the Constitution of India that guarantees the right to life and to personal liberty. The court has interpreted this provision to include the right to a healthy environment, thus laying the foundation for creating a body of environmental jurisprudence in India. In the landmark cases such as the MC Mehta case of 87, the Vellore Citizen Welfare Forum, the Supreme Court had established the fundamental principles of environmental law, including the well-celebrated polluters pay principle, the precautionary principle, and the concept of sustainability. These decisions demonstrated the judiciary's willingness to fill the gaps in the legislation on environmental governance and activate the executive for making the compliances. Climate change presents a more complex challenge, one that involves not just the local or the national interest, but larger global concerns. While continuing to address localized environmental degradation, the Supreme Court now faces the daunting task of integrating global climate imperatives into the domestic legal framework. So, what is climate liability, a new dimension of environmental law? Climate liability is nothing but fixing the responsibility for the adverse effects of climate change, whether to be borne by governments or the corporations or individuals. This concept is rapidly evolving as climate litigation gains traction worldwide. Courts in various countries are being called upon to adjudicate cases where petitioners seek to hold parties accountable for their contributions to the greenhouse gas emissions or failure to mitigate climate risk adequately. In the Indian context, the judiciary may have to consider climate liability as an extension of the environmental jurisprudence. While the Supreme Court has not yet been confronted with large-scale climate liability lawsuits of the kind seen in the United States or Europe, the increasing incidence of climate-related events in India, as in floods, droughts, coastal erosion, suggests that such cases are imminent. The question then arises is, what should be the contours of climate liability in India? Who should be held accountable? And what are the remedies that are available for those affected by climate change? These are not easy questions to answer. The judiciary will have to examine and provide guidance as it interprets constitutional provisions in the light of evolving climate realities. Coming to what was just being mentioned in the speech by my predecessor speaker, the M.K. Raj Singh case, on March 21st of this year, in this case, the Supreme Court of India has delivered a pivotal judgment bolstering the nation's efforts against climate change. This decision allows citizens to hold accountable any entity failing to mitigate man-made global warming effectively. The court recognized climate change as a violation of fundamental rights, specifically the right to life and liberty under the Constitution. This verdict reflects an increasing global acknowledgement of the profound societal impacts of climate change. The case of Raj Singh began sometime in the year 2019. Initially, the focus was on protecting the habitat of the great Indian bustard. An earlier interim order that was passed in 21 mandated that power transmission lines in the region be placed underground. But renewable energy companies contested this. The latest ruling modifies the 21 verdict, striking a balance between development and wildlife protection by forming a 7-member committee to prioritize areas for both transmission lines and conservation of the species. What makes this ruling significant is that when it went beyond protection of wildlife and emphasized the state's duty to safeguard citizens from the effect of climate change. The Supreme Court acknowledged India's efforts to protect climate through national laws and international commitments, defining climate action as essential for both environmental conservation and human rights. It was observed that climate change impacts the quality of life and constitutes infringement of fundamental rights under Article 40 and Article 21. The need for more comprehensive environmental legislation was also felt and highlighted. So what is the global context of this ruling? This ruling aligns with a growing global trend of linking climate action with human rights. In a similar case, in the year 24 itself, in the very same month of April, the European Court of Human Rights has held the Swiss government accountable for, for insufficient action on climate change, demonstrating an emerging judicial focus on governmental responsibility for environmental protection. Both cases emphasize the need for nations to uphold and enforce the rights of citizens to a clean environment, intensifying global discussions on climate mitigation. What are the implications for India vis-à-vis this judgment? This judgment is likely to pave the way for strengthening India's environmental laws by establishing a holistic legal framework for addressing climate change. By making Articles 48A and 51AG that fall under Part 4 and Part 4A of the Constitution and are a part of the directive principles of state policies and fundamental duties respectively more enforceable. It empowers citizens to challenge deficient or insufficient climate action. This decision of the Supreme Court is also a step forward towards integrating human rights in the climate discourse, and it positions India to influence global climate change policy. It also has a diplomatic and legal impact. Internationally, the ruling in Raj Singh's case enhances India's credibility as a committed climate change leader. It can serve as a model for other nations and strengthen India's standing in global climate forums. The judgment underscores the need for developing countries like ours to balance economic growth with environmental sustainability, aligning the international climate goals. By placing human rights at the core of the climate jurisprudence, the Supreme Court has created a framework that could shape future climate litigation globally. This ruling signifies a crucial shift in India's approach to climate change. It links environmental preservation with fundamental rights. It has also strengthened the domestic legal avenues for addressing climate issues, and it elevates India's role in international climate diplomacy, showcasing the judiciary's progressive approach on one of the most pressing challenges of our times. And now let us look at the path ahead. The judgment in Raj Singh's case marks a watershed in India's legal landscape relating to climate change. While this is a significant step forward, it raises several questions about the future of climate litigation in India. The judiciary's acknowledgement of climate change as a human rights issue sets a precedent that may lead to a surge of climate-related cases. However, for the courts to manage such cases effectively, the legal framework governing climate accountability must be robust and well-defined. The challenges that are faced in climate litigation is also something I propose to touch upon. Despite the judiciary's proactive stance, climate litigation faces several challenges. What are they? First, determining causation in climate cases is inherently a complex procedure. Climate change is a consequence of multitude of factors that makes it difficult to pinpoint a single entity which can be held to be responsible for the environmental damage. Second, access to justice remains a concern. Vulnerable and marginalized communities, who are often the most affected by climate change, may lack the resources to engage in a prolonged legal battle. The judiciary has the duty to ensure that legal processes are inclusive and accessible to all sections of the society. And that is why, friends, courts resort to appointing amicus curiae to assist it, and they also appoint expert committees to give reports to take the matter further. Furthermore, balancing development goals with environmental sustainability will always remain a delicate task. India's developmental needs are substantial, and rapid industrialization is seen as a key factor to drive economic growth. However, unchecked development risks exacerbating environmental degradation and climate vulnerability must be noticed. Courts will increasingly be called upon to strike a balance between these competing interests, and their decisions will shape the trajectory of India's sustainable development goals. On the aspect of international collaboration on climate jurisprudence, I would like to say that as climate change is a global phenomenon, there will always be intersections with the domestic courts and tribunals with international legal frameworks. Indian courts, particularly the Supreme Court, are well positioned to influence global climate jurisprudence through their progressive decisions. With the Raj Singh's judgment, India joins a growing number of jurisdictions that have strengthened the bond between human rights and environmental protection. Exchange of ideas and best practices across borders is always crucial in developing a cohesive global response to climate change. Internationally, bodies like the International Court of Justice and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change are platforms that are offering transnational climate disputes resolutions. By aligning their decisions with global norms and frameworks, Indian courts can contribute significantly to international climate governance. Next, let's look at the role of PILs in advancing climate justice. Public interest litigations have been a powerful tool in India's legal system, particularly in the realm of environmental protection. The judiciary has used PILs to recognize the role of concerned citizens and non-government organizations, allowing them to file petitions on behalf of affected communities. Moving forward, the PIL can play a pivotal role in advancing climate justice in India by empowering the civil society to challenge inadequate climate action by governments, by corporations, and by public bodies. The future of PIL in climate litigation remains promising, but it must be ensured that it is used with responsibility and effectively. courts must scrutinize PILs and pick up only those that address genuine concerns and are not misused for frivolous or politically motivated purposes. A strengthened framework for PIL allows for greater participation of citizens in the climate governance, reinforcing the principles of democracy and accountability. While the judiciary has made significant contributions to environmental protection, there is a pressing need for comprehensive legislation dedicated specifically for climate change. India has several environmental laws in place, but they are often fragmented and sometimes found to be insufficient to address the multifaceted challenges posed by climate change. A robust national climate law, grounded in constitutional principles and aligned with international obligations, is, to my mind, the way forward. Such a legislation should include provisions for climate adaptation and mitigation, mechanisms for holding both the state and the non-state actors accountable, and modalities for compensating communities affected by climate-related disasters. The law should also prioritize vulnerable populations, ensure that they have access to resources, to legal remedies, and protection from climate impact, while continuing to interpret existing laws expansively in the interest of protecting the environment. The judiciary can recommend the creation of such legislations through its orders and, as a tide over, fill in the gaps with affirmative directions, as it has been doing in the past. In conclusion, the judiciary has a pivotal role to play in shaping the future of climate justice in India. The Raj Singh case has paved the way for a new era of climate litigation, where the protection of environment is inextricably linked to the fundamental rights of its citizens. As the judiciary continues to deal with climate-related cases, it will need to balance development with sustainability, ensure access to justice for the weaker section of the society or the marginalized communities, integrate global climate imperatives into domestic legal frameworks. The path ahead is challenging, but over the years, the judiciary has demonstrated its capacity to adapt and evolve in response to emerging issues. By fostering a legal environment that promotes accountability, equity, and sustainability, courts have been powerful agents of change and in the fight against climate change. The endeavor has been to uphold the constitutional values of justice, of liberty and equality, and at the same time ensure a secure future for the future generations. As we chart our course forward, it's vital to remember, friends, that we cannot function in silos. The essence of this journey is collaborative. It's about ensuring that the solutions we find are not just legally sound, but are also equitable and forward-looking. By doing so, India can be positioned not just as a participant, but as a leader in the global dialogue on climate, liability, on justice and jurisprudence. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd now like to invite President of the Mobius Foundation, Mr. Praveen Garg, to please felicitate our chief guest. Please felicitate our chief guest, Honorable Ms. Justice Nima Kohli, former Supreme Court Judge of India. And also, she is the first woman Chief Justice of the Telangana High Court. will now commence the panel discussion. Today's panel discussion will explore the increasing environmental, social and legal challenges posed by climate-induced events. The theme Climate Liability, Justice and Jurisprudence will delve into accountability, responsibility and legal redressal frameworks for addressing climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, each panelist here today brings a unique perspective and wealth of knowledge to the table. Their valuable experience, research and advocacy and dedication to address environmental challenges and degradations have made significant impact. Together we have an incredible opportunity to learn from their knowledge and expertise today. So please allow me to introduce our League of Extraordinary panelists today. We have Dr. Afroz Ahmed, our guest of honor, who's an honorable expert member, National Green Tribunal. He is a world-renowned environmental scientist, academician, development administrator, and a civil servant. He has advised and briefed former presidents of India, Pratibha Patil and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, and the Prime Ministers of India, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Dr. Manmohan Singh, in the Narmada matter. So please, may we welcome you to the dais. Our special guest this evening is Mr. Chandra Bhushan. He is a researcher, writer and campaigner for environmentally sound and socially inclusive development. He currently serves as the President and CEO of the International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, iForest, an environmental research and innovation organization. His prior role was as Deputy Director of the Center for Science and Environment, a prominent environmental organization in India. So we welcome you to the dais. This evening we have with us Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay, who is a senior advocate of the Supreme Court and founded India's first environmental law firm, Enviro Legal Defense Firm. Mr. Upadhyay has been practicing environment and development law since 1993. Mr. Upadhyay has served as an environmental and development law expert to most well-known international, multilateral, national and state institutions. He is also the honorary managing trustee of ELD Foundation. We welcome you, sir, to the dais. Next we have Mr. Praveen Garg, IAS retired, President Mobius Foundation. Mr. Praveen Garg has worked for more than 3 decades in the Indian Administrative Service, Madhya Pradesh cadre, and served in the Government of India with the Ministry of Law and Justice, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He has served for more than 25 years with the state government of Madhya Pradesh, holding posts such as District Magistrate of Sidi, Satna, Khandwa and Jabalpur, Secretary Finance, MD, MP SIDC and Revenue Commissioner, Bhopal Division. Currently, he is in boards of LIC Mutual Funds, AMC and Lemon Tree Hotels Limited as an independent director, and presently he is working as the President of Mobius Foundation. We welcome you, sir, to the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator this evening is Mr. Jitendra Cheema. Jitendra Cheema has over 30 years of standing at the bar in India and also barrister and solicitor qualified to practice law in Ontario, Canada, and as advocate in the SADC region, Africa. He has worked extensively as a legal practitioner in the various high courts in India, Supreme Court of India, regulators and arbitral tribunals. Mr. Cheema is a projects, energy, natural resources, infrastructure, climate and sustainability lawyer. He has recently authored a very comprehensive book called The Policy, Law and Practice. So we welcome you today and thank you for moderating the event this evening. Seema, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you to the organizers for organizing this beautiful evening under open skies and the greenery around us. And a very, very interesting place in Delhi, which hosts many cultural and social events. So thank you for organizing this evening. I was with a historian last evening, and we were talking about climate change, and she said a very interesting thing to me. She said the civilizations are built around three things, and we all know, and we have examples of that. We have the Indus Valley civilization built around River Indus. We have the Mesopotamian civilization built around River Euphrates. You see across South America and other jurisdictions, there are similar examples. तो उन्होंने मुझे बोला कि civilizations are built around बादशाह, बादल और बहार. Three things: बादशाह, बहार and बादल. Badal representing water, and Bahar essentially talking about climate, और हमारी जो climate की व्यवस्था है. So essentially our focus will be on these three subjects. We will leave the Badshah out for today. I know there are policy makers here who have worked in the space of policy, but because that's the political sphere, so we will not touch that for this evening. But we will certainly touch Badal and Bahar for sure this evening. So therefore, my first question to the panelists, my esteemed panelists, the experts from National Green Tribunal, what challenges are you really looking at in terms of climate change within the tribunal and outside the tribunal per se?
Thank you so much, Seema sir, and other colleagues. Very relevant questions you have raised, and I must say that climate change generally we only consider in general terms worldwide, globally as well as in the Indian context, that the level of carbon dioxide increase, methanes and nitrogen oxides. Generally we concentrate on that. But as a apex tribunal on the specialized subject of the environment, kinds in the world, we have seen there are so many issues that need to be addressed, that is not being addressed. Like, to take the carbon, people are talking about fossil fuels, the gases, the oils. They are concentrating on these three aspects only. But we have now introduced in the tribunal, and we would like to share to the colleagues here and distinguished assembly, that we are neglecting the forest, we are neglecting the soil, we are neglecting the water, we are neglecting the ocean. You must realize that the forest, even in India alone, They are carbon sinks for about 7,000 million ton of carbon in the forest alone. If you think ocean, 50% carbon is in the ocean. The most important thing that has been neglected so far, which we are addressing now, is the wetlands, the lakes, the ponds, the vegetation available in the lakes and ponds, the sediments available in the lakes and ponds and wetlands. They are also a great reserves for the carbon. So now we are addressing in a holistic manner, integrated manner, all the aspects. Take the soil. Now the mechanized agriculture, that has been a major cause of release of carbon into the atmosphere. And now it is a need for a conservation agriculture. I am quoting an example. I was advisor to Maharashtra government and I had an opportunity to visit a farm nearby Lonavala, and a very renowned agriculturist, he was in US, he came back and he started working. Now he is doing only tillage agriculture, replacing this high, you can say, machinery agriculture or mechanized agriculture. And I was surprised to know that if 1% carbon increase in 1 acre of land, it is 18 ton carbon sequestration, 18 ton of carbon sequestration. So now, to cut short, similarly with the wetlands, all the vegetations available in the wetlands, the sediments in the wetlands, they all are the footprints of the carbons. So now it is a high time that integrated approach is required, not only the fossil fuels, the gases, and what you can say, the oils, but if you see in totality the environment, you have to focus on all these aspects also, the necessity and importance of all these aspects. And we have to shift the paradigm from only the coal and all that. Coal, of course, very important. I must realize that when I came here in the NGT, there was a case for the fly ash in this country. You know, about 800 million ton fly ash generated in worldwide. India contribute about 180 million ton of carbon dioxide. Sorry, this fly ash. Now this fly ash, proper management was not there. Lakhs of hectares of land is occupied by the fly ash as a pond. And the problem with the fly ash, you must be knowing, the person who are from the Madhya Pradesh must be knowing Singrauli and all these areas where breathing is a problem. So we have educated and made a fly ash mission in the country, having 4 to 5 secretaries, Government of India, and now they are working very well for that. So in this manner, the NGT role is not only education only, it is now prevention as well as amelioration. So we are trying that each and every aspect, every case which is coming to us, we should give some inputs for at least translation into the field situation, at the ground situation. So these things are changing, and now a holistic approach, integrated approach is being adopted by the tribunals, and there are thousands of cases I can share with you where the intervention of the tribunal has resulted lot of changes in this country. Now you see, take the rivers, 20 river basins you have, 50% river basin are under the conflict of sharing of the water. We have yet not, after independence also, we have not been able to decide to demarcate the floodplain zone of the rivers. And now all encroachment from the government, from the privates, every sector, somebody is opening medical college in the name of public facility, some are doing encroachment their own. Similar is the case with the wetlands. Most of the wetlands, 60% wetlands in the most metropolitan city like Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi, Ahmedabad and all that has gone already. Thousands of cases are coming to us not only encroachment and pollution, but the wetlands have been erased from the map. And you know the wetlands environmental services. It is a great service to the nation. It is a lungs, it is a kidney to filter the entire pollution and make the water pure. And it is a great sinks of the carbon, which we are talking about the global climate change. So now we have to focus on that. And I think similarly with the case of the forest, that we are now focusing in NGT to invest on the nature. We are directing huge money is available as a environmental compensation with the Central Pollution Control Board. With the Pollution Control Board of the states and union territories, we are now channelizing, mobilizing that money by directions that this money should be invested for the nature, to develop the biodiversity park, to restore, to rehabilitate the lake ecosystem, river ecosystem. So these are the things we are now doing because we are, thankful to the Indian government who has created this tribunal as a specialized tribunal, and its role is very immense, and especially the environmental lawyers like Upadhyay Sahab and so many. I can not name so many people who are committed really for the cause of environment, bringing the cases that is changing the state of the environment in a positive manner.
Thank you. So I was, while the judge from the Supreme Court was addressing us earlier, in my book at 115 page, actually I quote her. So I was telling her after her address that you had actually wrote about the debate between the developing and the developed world as to a matter which came from the Bombay High Court to the Supreme Court about reclamation of sea in Mumbai, where Justice Chandrachud and Honorable Justice Amakoli have observed that this is not caused only climate change. Effects of climate change are not only because of what is happening in the developing world, but also the historical emissions that have been made by the developed world. So I was just sharing that and sort of mentioning that to her. So there is one study which tells us that from 1850 to 2019, the Southern Asia contributed only 4% of the all of historical CO2 emissions of the world. Imagine this is South Asia and not India alone. India is included in this 4%. So my question to Mr. Garg, is climate noise on developing nations a little louder than the rest of the world? What is the thinking? You work for the ministry. What is the thinking within the portals of the government on the subject?
Interesting question. But as the Indian government has been consistently maintaining the stand that the historical emissions and the historical damage to the environment or to the climate, which has been done by the Western Hemisphere, that needs to be compensated. And when we are at this stage of development, you see, if you compare the per capita income, we are just $2,000 right now. And US is about $80,000. And as the famous that unlocking of the fortune at the pyramid. So we have a huge population which is not on the below poverty line. It is rising. The per capita income is going to be 6 times in 2047. And they have aspirations, their lifestyle. And if you even see HDI, that is the Human Development Index, they are below 5, whereas Sweden and these countries are above 9. So, we have to develop. Now the development has to be aligned with environment also. So the ministry had consistently has said about it, that you cannot stop us from development, but we will definitely maintain the balance. If you see, The new mission which has been launched by the ministry and by the Honorable Prime Minister is LIFE, which is, life for environment. So it says we'll develop, definitely we'll develop, but in a sustainable way. So there's a consistency. And even in bilateral meetings or multilateral meetings in COPs, it has been raised number of times.
So having said that, coming to Mr. Upadhyay, we're going to talk about justice a lot this evening because climate liability. I'm going to come to Sir a little later about climate liability. But on justice, see, even if the judgment which the Honorable Judge was referring to, M.K. Ranjit Singh judgment, I think while it defines or asserts that Article 21 protection would now be given to those who are affected by the effects of climate change, this would open a Pandora's box in terms of litigation. It has severe consequences, economic and otherwise, for a developing country like ours. What's your view on that?
Thanks. That's an interesting and a tricky question. I think it opens an avenue. It's not to say that this is the first time that avenue was opened. We've had all the basic principles like the precautionary principle or the polluter-based principle or the principle of sustainable development. Little known is the principle of non-regression, which the National Green Tribunal in fact espoused way back, I think about 5 or 6 years ago. We have the rivers as living entity judgment by Justice Rajiv Sharma from the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which unfortunately got stayed in the Supreme Court. So it's not as if this is the first time that a Supreme Court or any other court of eminence has come out with some avenue for people to agitate on the issues of climate change. The trouble is, and if I have to answer your query or question in this way, is how do you operationalize that lofty principle? And whether Article 21 interpretation by M.K. Ranjit Singh judgment is good enough for people to agitate and whether they will have real solutions is the challenge. Just yesterday, Justice Chandrachud was delivering the Nambiar lecture, and one of the things he said very interestingly is the constitutional framework that we have and the original intent of the Constitution has to now give way to modern thinking. And one of the key things he talked about is whether the climate law framework can be infused in the constitutional framework. So I think what Justice Hima Kohli was saying, which was a lot of relevance, and maybe Chandra will also hint to that, there is time to have that climate law framework so there's a little more clarity rather than just a judicial principle of Article 21 to take it forward. So unless we have a sound and a robust climate law framework, where people are clear about locus, people are clear about what kind of adjudication forum we have, what kind of climate strategies we can have, I don't think we are going to really march ahead. But I think what M.K. Ranjit Singh judgment does is opens that window where we can actually build upon the subject of climate law with this huge country with huge diversity and maybe take the issues a little more hands-on to really give some solutions to the climate challenge that we have.
Mr. Bhushan, so what is, in your understanding, the climate liability in the Indian context? How do we evaluate it? There is going to be a whole host of issues around if you're going to fix a liability, how you're going to value it, and B, who is going to pay the damages. So a little bit of a context for our audience on this, and then I'll do a second round with the net panel.
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I think there are a lot of issues that have been discussed by my eminent panelists as well as by Honorable Justice Hima Kohli. And I want to touch upon some of those issues because I do have some contrarian view. For example, I have a contrarian view on Ranjit Singh judgment. While the judgment is fine, it juxtaposes wildlife protection with climate change. Okay. I like the climate change part of the judgment. I don't like the case in which this judgment was given. Are we basically saying that for climate change we have to sacrifice other environmental aspects, like Great Indian Buster? I don't think that's how we are going to solve climate change. So let me just, I don't want to get into the details of my argument, why I believe that this judgment might would have set a wrong precedence for the future.
Please do.
Okay. Okay.
A little bit.
For example, take forestry. Sanjay works in forestry sector. A lot of you work in forestry sector. Tomorrow the foresters come and say that I have to sequester carbon, and I want to do the most fast growing species that can sequester carbon. And it is a monoculture. And I want to do it in reserve forest area. What judgment will Supreme Court give? Will it give precedence to the ecosystem of forest, or will it give the precedence to the carbon storage potential of forest? And I can give you hundreds of examples where this question will be raised. Are you going to compare one climate challenge with another? Earlier we had this problem of human right versus environment. Displacement was a classic issue. Do you want to do reserve forest or ecologically sensitive area by displacing people? Okay. This question is going to come now. Are we going to juxtapose one environmental challenge with another? So I want to move to other issue, but I think it is something for legal scholars to think the context of every judgment. As I said, I like the climate aspect of the judgment. That climate is a human right. The context in which this judgment was given can be problematic in future. That is point number one. I completely agree with you about population. The discussion on population in this country goes south without understanding the nature of the challenge that population has. And Sanjay, there should be a good debate on environment, climate and population, because there is a section of people who believe that population is not a problem for India. But our population is not stabilizing. Even at the replacement rate, birth replacement rate that we have achieved as a country, the momentum of population is such that we could be 1.6, 1.8 billion. Our per capita water availability is less than 800 meter cube per year, fresh water. Part of Indo-Gangetic plain has lower water than Sahel in Africa. Our per capita land availability is less than 0.2 hectare per capita. So I think from resource challenge perspective, I think population is a very important topic that you raise and that should be discussed. Now coming to liability. Climate change liability is an international liability. It cannot be domestically enforced. Okay?
I agree with that.
So I believe that any jurisprudence on liability has to be developed in international context.
It's a transboundary issue.
Transboundary issue, we already have under UNFCCC a decision on loss and damage. The negotiation is going on loss and damage right now, and we have to now see how we will have to do some domestic law to fulfill the international obligation on loss and damage. So another point I would like to make here is that if India has, the reason why we need climate law also is because we are committing a lot internationally. And if we are committing internationally, then we have Article 253, which is expressly made for our international commitment. We have done that with Ozone and Montreal Protocol. If we have made an international commitment, it has to be reflected in our domestic law. That's something we have not done with biodiversity. We have not done with climate change and many other international conventions that the country has signed. So from the mere fact that we are committing internationally to make sure that we meet our international commitment, we should have a climate law. Apart from the many other factors that Honorable Justice Hima Kohli mentioned, why we should have climate law. The other reason which needs to be discussed, and maybe that could be the second round of discussion, is what kind of climate law. Do we need a brand new law and include everything in one law? Or do we think about some overarching framework law? So that is the other kind of other discussion that we need to have.
Yeah. So, like UK has a climate change law now, a climate change act. So, taking on the cue from what you just said, I'll move to Mr. Garg because he has worked for the ministry. So, a question directed to him from a legislative perspective. I know in 2015 a climate bill was presented in the Parliament. It didn't see the light of the day. In 2021, I think Mr. Sinha did a private member's bill also, but I don't think it moved anywhere. Do you think the time has come for India to set a separate climate change law, and what should be the contours of such a law if legislated?
It's a very complex issue. You have so many laws, regulations, and rules. Now to combine all them into one, it's a very difficult task. So what I would suggest, which I had seen in the financial sector after the financial crisis of 2008, they appointed a retired Supreme Court judge to study and suggest what should be done. So it suggested different, framework, and Government of India in the Finance Ministry, they started implementing it. So I suggest the committee of the experts or a commission headed by a retired Supreme Court judge who is well versed with this subject. The committee should frame what should be the overarching framework and then what should be the laws within that. Now, amending laws very frequently, as we are seeing, it gives rise to different interpretations. The law which has been already interpreted and settled, now you have a new law. So, of course, it may be good business for the lawyers, but not for the general public. So, I think that would be the right approach, to have an overarching law, but well thought out for at least 2-3 years. It should not be a knee-jerk reaction that somebody has said, so we should do it, because it may create more problems rather than giving solutions to us.
So two things have come out of this discussion so far. I think one big issue, elephant in the room, is this trans-boundary emissions. How do we do this? And I think for the audience, I must share that while the United Kingdom has a climate change act or climate act, it about 5 months back has just opened a fossil fuel development in the north of England also. So there is, while you may say in the developed world that all these legislations are being brought, but there is also acts which are contradictory to very legislative spirit which has been enacted in these countries. So that's why I directed that question to you. Any thoughts you have, Mr. Upadhyay, on this?
I just want to take on from where Chandra spoke about climate liability being an international context. While I agree with that in principle, but I don't think we should ignore the elephant in the room, which is the country itself. And I think there is a huge case for also disaggregating climate liability within the Indian legal framework. And that's equally important. When we talk about, for example, the loss and damage fund, we have to connect with the Indian context of the similar kind of funds that we have, whether it's the Campa fund or whether we have the District Mineral Foundation fund or whether we have the Environment Relief Fund under the NGT Act. We need to also start looking at the domestic liability as well. India being such a huge country, there are very clear evidence of impacts of the way we are developing. So I think climate liability also has to be housed within the Indian legal framework. That's one. Whether we should have an overarching law or not, I think overarching law helps. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword. We have seen that with the Environment Protection Act. It is so overarching that sometimes you forget why it was actually made for. There's a risk of overarching law. But what is important is, unless it stands on some very sound footing, for example, how does it actually ensure climate justice? How will it enable climate resilience? How will it focus on climate vulnerability? How will it assure financial assistance for mitigation adaptation? And of course, the international commitment that we do in Article 253 that Chandra mentioned. So I think we need to be really pragmatic about having that framework. And if we can have a very focused climate strategy, and one of the thoughts that I've had, thanks to my late guru, Dr. Chhatrapati Singh, he used to say that it's time India changes its enviro-legal framework itself and start focusing on geographies. Unless we have specific law on mountains, unless we have specific laws on coasts, and not a CRZ notification which changes 47 times in 20 years, right? Unless we have such laws, for example, we don't have any law on combating desertification. We don't have a law on renewable energy. I remember 1994 was the first draft that was made on renewable energy, and we still don't have, after 5 drafts of renewable energy law in India. And that was supposed to be the instrument for mitigation in this country. So I think we need to be careful when you draft a law and have the right people who understand the discipline of both law, administration and pragmatism to really draft that thing.
Yeah, and also if you really look at it, the renewable energy sort of subject has basically been subsumed in the Electricity Act, if you really look at it. You know, instead of having a separate legislation for new energy fields, I've been a lawyer for nearly 2 decades in the energy space. You see, when renewable energy was being, as a policy of the government, was being brought forward, it simply sort of certain sort of rules were brought into the Electricity Act, and that's it, and some policies were brought in. There was no separate legislation that was enacted. We think polluters pay principle, precautionary principle, duty of care, which essentially is the principle which I think some of the Western jurisprudence really reflects. Is there a need now for a new principle, or is this all there and we are done with? You know, is this enough? And I think I'll take this question around the sort of to the member from NGT.
I think
The regression principle he mentioned, you know.
I think absolutely I endorse my view what Upadhyay Sahab has mentioned. Such a big country, we have, I think, most of the laws act in our country. But as Chandusarji has said, definitely this climate change, of course, other developed nation, there is no any dispute about that. They are responsible for that. So there is a need to have an international law, especially for this climate debt or climate revenue, that who has damaged, they should deposit that revenue in a form of an international bank and all that. And that money should be given to the developing countries who are developing and using these fossil fuels and all these things. So that arrangement, that institutional mechanism has to be done at international level. There is no doubt about that. But at national level, as you have rightly said, I think each and every aspect of environment has been addressed, has been considered by India to address it with the different laws, different acts, except I further endorse and agree with Upadhyay ji, because mountains, this entire country, you have mountain ranges right from the Arauli to Himalayas, to Satpura, to Vindhyachal, to Eastern Ghat, Western Ghat. Plateaus. I was handling cases related to Arauli, and I tried that there should be an institutional mechanism in each state which falls under Arauli. But it was very difficult that the state should come up their own, that they should have a special authority or something. But we started with the Haryana, they agreed for a board or like that. So we should address all this issue of our country, take the mountains, maximum rivers originate from that, we have no any particular except this whatever law existing for the general things, not for specifically for the mountains and all that. So that is need of the hour, and I think certain acts and certain laws for the climate also can be introduced. That will be helpful for us, because in our schedule also we don't have any such laws like climate law which can be referred. Supposedly we take some time help of the Forest Conservation Act, we take the Forest Policy, and you can say Indian Forest Act, Biodiversity Act, and all that things. But especially for the climate, we don't have. We have dealt the cases now, you can see that in Chamoli and in the Jammu Kashmir. The land subsidence, that it is going down and down. The reason is that earlier there was a lake that has been reclaimed and certain establishments have been established there. So there is no particular law for that to restrict the people, except to link with certain laws which are available with that. But I think this is a high time for the climate. We should have some act, some law, especially for our country. At international level, of course, there are so many conventions, so many things, but for climate justice, there is a need to have a climate fund, and that fund should be with the participation of all the nations and support to the developing nation by the countries who are polluting much more.
Mr. Bhushan, I was just thinking about loss and damage fund and what are the negotiations going around it. It has been announced, what, 8 months since? Yeah,
About a year back.
yeah, and the rules are still to be set. So, so I think any sort of views on what we have circulated around.
Let me tell you one thing, that climate change will disturb our existing legal framework. I think for the legal fraternity, it is important to understand how our existing legal framework related to land, labor, environment, at least 3 I can see very clearly, which climate change is going to disturb. Let me give you an example. All our environmental law or related to land is about establishing new industry. We do environmental impact assessment to establish new industry. We have no law to close the industry. Okay. Other than coal mining, we have coal mining closure and nuclear power plant who have to submit closure law. But the fact is, if we want to reach net zero, which is the commitment of India, you will have to close all your thermal power plant, all your coal mines, all your oil and gas establishment. LPG will not be in your home. Okay. Do we have a law to handle the level of closure that will be required? Take labor. We have Industrial Dispute Act. It is a labor dispute, right? We do not have a Labor Transition Act. But the kind of disturbance in economy that will happen, because if you want to address climate change, then that labor law has to change. Land Acquisition Act or Forest Act. Land acquisition is purpose driven. We acquire land for certain purpose. What happens when the purpose ends? Can that land be repurposed? Say for example a thermal power plant. So I think we also need climate law, because many of our existing law needs to be modified for the existing situation that will arise. Number 2, I think we need to differentiate between liability and fund. Okay, Sanjay, liability is very difficult to establish. We already have a climate fund. It's called as Disaster Management Fund. Union Home Ministry has money. Whenever there is a disaster, the money is distributed from the central government. That money has increased in the last 20 years for about 5,000 crore to 60,000 crore. In fact, next year it is about going to be 1 lakh crore. So you can also see the amount of loss and damage that is happening because of climate change. So while I agree that domestically we need to think about a climate fund, establishing liability. On whom are we going to establish liability domestically will be very difficult. So if we can break between liability and compensation and fund, it is possible. Internationally also we are doing it. Loss and damage fund is not about liability. Okay? It is about a fund which is going to help climate victims. Such a thing is possible domestically and we should encourage it.
So, for the audience, there is an example for funds being available in the fossil fuel industry, for example. Okay, when you do a revenue sharing contract or earlier contracts for giving out an asset, an oil and gas asset, there is a provision, and I have done a number of them, and I have actually negotiated a lot of these settlements as well. There is a clause that how do you decommission an asset, an oil and gas asset, on a high sea, in Arabian Sea, for that matter. So there's a way to do it. It says that when you, I won't tell you the percentage, when you reach, when the oil well reaches a certain level of extraction, you start depositing part of the revenue in a separate fund, which is the decommissioning fund. Okay, so that the purpose is that if we need at the end of the period of the life cycle of that asset, say it's going to end in 5 years' time, in the third year you start depositing certain amount in this fund, so that by the year of decommissioning you actually have a fund available to you. That's a different thing than the parties who are party to that contract keep fighting who take that fund away. I mean, I've dealt those cases also. But there is an example, and I think we could take that example.
We have that example in nuclear power industry.
Correct.
And mining industry.
Correct. Same as in oil and gas also. So there is the decommissioning fund, and when you decommission an asset, it brings a closure to an oil and gas asset. We have to take out the rigs, we have to decommission it, the whole, there's money available within the corpus of the consortium which is actually extracting the oil. Any thoughts, Mr. Garg? Yes.
So the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Boards are supposed to monitor, you know, the EC, when the EC is given either by the central ministry or by the state SEER, they're supposed to monitor. And if they exceed those limits, it is for the Central Pollution Control Board or the State Pollution Control Board to put a notice to them and may even close the unit. You see, the famous case of Vedanta, this was Tuticorin, they closed the plant. So it can be done. So closure is possible if they violate the law on the emissions or whatever the pollution, like for the environmental clearance, there are certain conditions on that. And there is an environmental, you have to manage how much afforestation you have to do, what you have to plant, that is also there. So, you know, he was mentioning about Singrauli. I used to be DM of CD when Singrauli was part of that. So ash tag was a big issue. So there we saw the national coal fields. They had planted huge number of trees, and the wildlife entered in those plantations. So this is a process which can be followed. It is there. And internationally, there is a global climate fund, which was the outcome of all these negotiations. And the Western countries, or the developed countries, committed initially $10 billion for that. Of course, it is now 13 billion, but initially they were not paying for that. But we require about $100 billion to address the issue of mitigation and adaptation to the climate change.
I'll just come back to you. It would not be fair if I don't raise two further points for discussion, and I'll just quickly go around the panel on this. You see, we are an agrarian economy. We currently are giving food grains to 800 million people across our country, which the government has been very kind since COVID, it has been distributing. I want to touch upon agriculture for a minute, and I think I just want to go around because I think this is very, very important. Agriculture in terms of CO2 emissions and agriculture effect of temperature on future production yield per acre in agriculture. Any thoughts across this? I think it would be very, very helpful if you go around the panel and sort of go quickly on this. Please, with you, sir.
I just wanted to react first to what Chandra was talking about. I think what he was talking about is not about a show cause notice based closure. I think he was talking about whether we can have an organized abandonment clause for closure once the purpose is met. And I think that is true primarily for extractive industries, but not for manufacturing or otherwise. So that is something that we need to have an understanding as to A, whether the purpose is solved and whether that particular geography can contain and have a carrying capacity of such industry, which is a very abused word today. How do you really ensure carrying capacity of how many brick kilns can operate in a particular geography? And I think that's a huge challenge we have today. That's number one. Number two, what you said very interestingly is about the purpose, let's say, of land acquisition purpose. And we remember doing a study from 1897 to 1998. And we wanted to see what is the meaning of public purpose and whether public purpose can actually change by way of another public purpose. And I was surprised that in those 100 years, the Honorable Supreme Court could not actually define what is exactly public purpose. And there were only certain guidelines of what public purpose could be. And therefore this public purpose is something which is a double-edged sword, I think, in many ways. We need to have some finality on what actually can be public purpose when we are acquiring, let's say, land for different kind of projects. So that's the two thoughts I had on
agriculture. Very quick one minute each.
No, I think I'll let it pass for another 2 minutes.
I think agriculture, very important issue. You know, the same time you have to meet the food security challenge, and the same time you have to preserve or conserve your soil and all the things. India has progressed very well in the field of agriculture, maybe development of irrigation, maybe introduction of high-yielding varieties and all that. But at the same time, if you take the case of Punjab, where the use of insecticide, pesticides in an uncontrolled manner have resulted very alarming situation of the groundwater. Now, even in the soil profile also, we are having 20 species of the earthworm. Now in entire Punjab, you have only 2 species of earthworm. All has gone. So this was a race for more production of green revolution. But at the same time, we have now understand the mistakes with introduction of these high-yielding varieties with the input from pesticide, insecticide and fertilizers. So there is a need for conservation agriculture now. The same production can be done, little bit less from that, but keeping into the soil health and to protect it from the desertification. Now the groundwater use in Punjab also, in other state also, that is becoming in the dark zone, which were earlier available very easily. The very alarming situation related to agriculture that need to be addressed with the groundwater as well as surface water, the health of the soil, and the same time to meet the food security challenge. That is most important issue that has to be addressed by all stakeholders. Similarly, for the soil conservation, we don't have any particular law for the soil protection. Like biodiversity and all that, we take it as the Environment Protection Act and all that, pollution of the soil and all that. But particularly we should have a soil conservation, at least soil conservation and management guidelines, or what you can say, any rules, just like we had for the wetlands. The rules came in 2017. Earlier also it was that was modified and came in 2017. That play very important to you. Since Mr. Garg belonged to Madhya Pradesh cadre, I was looking Narmada and responsible for 4 states to look into from the government of India side. Recently we had passed a order for the Bhopal lake. You saw that is a Ramsar site. But the government was constructing a floating restaurant in the zone of influence. So we have ordered for demolition, done a great job. They made a plea that there are so many Ramsar sites where motor boats is also allowed to run in. They asked that give the name of the Ramsar site where motor boats are allowed to run. And when it was furnished, all that Ramsar site was also stopped, that cannot be run. Then they went for appeal also. Now finally it has become the law. So if you have some instrument like law, what Bhusar Sahab has said, it becomes very easy for us also to quote particular class and all that to adjudicate properly. So this is the things I wanted to share to you.
To go very quickly.
I'll give a different dimension to agriculture. If you see the population, one of the core problem of this country is the huge population. You see the population which is dependent on agriculture and see the size of land holding. It's all fragmented, very small size. Subsistence kind of agriculture they are doing. And that's why now for, that food security can be created by consolidation of those farmlands, which happens like in Punjab, maybe productivity is very high because of pesticides and other use of chemical fertilizers. But see the huge population which is just sitting there and they spend, if 100 rupees on the agriculture inputs, they only earn 100 rupees at the end of the year. So we need to make this kind of a shift of population, and that can happen by education and skill. They need to move towards other sectors, manufacturing or service sectors. And even the contribution of agriculture to total GDP, I don't remember the figures, but it's very low now. It's 14%. So it's not as 50% or something. So this is a huge population, this is a huge problem which needs to be addressed by a policy, that how to shift this huge population sitting on little land. And then you have hesitations, you have all kinds of law and order problems. And again, it chokes the courts with those kind of cases. So that's it's a different dimension to agriculture.
Chima sir, I'll take 1 minute on agriculture and 2 minutes on climate law. Hope that will be all.
Go ahead. We have some questions to be asked from the audience as well.
I believe that agriculture has huge potential both for mitigation and adaptation. Somehow, our international commitment does not include agriculture sector. I have never understood why. So when India has committed to UNFCCC that we want to reduce our emission intensity by 45% or renewable energy target, agriculture sector is excluded. So any climate debate in India does not include agriculture sector, which I think is not wise, because the potential of agriculture sector to sequester carbon and therefore increase organic carbon, which this entire country is lacking right now, as well as potential of agriculture sector for adaptation, economic diversification is huge. So that is my 1 minute. I'm here because a month back, 20 of us, including Mr. Upadhyay and 18 other experts, sat together to draft India's climate law. Okay. And I had written this report in 2021 on what should be the nature of climate law in India, which I believed about a year back was outdated. So within 2 years, I recognized that what I had written in 2021 was outdated. So 20 of us were there at Tijara Fort for 2 days in closed room to discuss what should be India's climate law, and that report will come out very soon. But there's a general consensus in the room that we need a climate law. The only difference was what should be the nitty-gritties of that law. And the other general consensus was that we have hundreds of climate relevant law. So you can divide law in two parts as far as climate change is concerned. One is climate relevant law. It means that law was not designed for climate change, but the outcome is climate action. Say for example, Renewable Energy and Electricity Act. Electricity Act can be considered as a climate relevant act. Then we have climate specific policies. We do not have any climate specific law in India. We have climate specific policies like National Action Plan on Climate Change and many others. So the other general consensus was that we have to use existing laws and institutions to make sure that the climate action is enhanced, and whatever is the gap, and there is significant gap, that gap can be filled with a new climate law instead of writing an omnibus law where you duplicate what already exists. So I will recommend that you all should look forward to that report. Maybe that can go to a retired Supreme Court judge and a committee to look at it, because 20 of us have sat together to look at that law.
Okay, thank you. So now I turn to the audience. I can only take 3 questions. If you can raise your hand and somebody can take the mic up to you, and there's a question there at the back. Introduce yourself, be very brief, and only ask the question. And who is it addressed to?
Hello.
Yes.
My warm greetings to everyone present here, to the panelists. I am Abhishek. I am a master's student in energy from TEDI, SAS. My question in general to the dais is that when we talk about climate change and when we talk about protecting our environment, especially when we talk about promoting greener cities and green culture, I feel the incentive that companies have is very limited, because it's climate change versus profitability. And when we talk about business, in all due practicality, profitability somehow is the core of running a business. So it is very interesting that intellectual thoughts are being promoted and people are made aware of it. And it's a good step that we're moving forward. But I just wanted to know, can the laws be more strict that can provide incentives, but at the same time give penalties in case companies do not comply?
Mr. Garg, if you can take that question. Any other hand I can see?
I take this question from the company's perspective or the corporate sector. So there is, SEBI's recent BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Standards, which says that the top 1,000 listed companies, and I studied, they constitute about 96% of the total market capitalization of the stock exchanges, which is nearly 3 lakh crores. So there's a reporting mechanism for them, and they have to be high on the ESG parameters, because they have to show to their shareholders. I'm talking of the listed companies, and which is a large number. Unlisted companies also exist. So they have to show to their shareholders that they are high on the ESG parameters. And there has been studies in the corporate sector, in the financial sector, that the companies which are complying with ESGs, just for the benefit of the audience, is environment, social and governance. Environment is one part. Social is how they treat their employees, whether they follow the labor laws, Minimum Wages Act, POSH, etc., etc. Governance is how they govern the company. So that is a big action which has been taken. And that penalizes, of course, it does not give the incentive directly. Indirectly the incentive is that the market price of that share will go up. So this is for the corporate sector only and the industry which are listed. But it's a big thing, it covers about 97% of the total industry in the country.
There was another question, there.
Greetings to the panelists. I'm Manya Srivasu from Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. My question is to respected Mr. Pradeen Garg. Drawing from your experience in the government sector, how public-private partnerships can be leveraged to promote environmental sustainability? That's something I would like to know.
Even if you see the new forest guidelines, the green credits, they're talking of PPPs, public-private partnerships. But public-private partnership, so far we have heard more in infrastructure sector, rather than in the green sector or than the forestry. But there are new avenues which are coming in, and government is proactive. Like I just mentioned about the green credits. Similarly, the carbon credits. There's so many things which can happen. Now, but when you say PPP, it means there has to be a private player and there has to be a public player, and there has to be a partnership. So the joint ventures can take advantage in any sector of the schemes of the government or the benefits which the government gives to them. So that's my response. Any further question, I'll be happy to answer.
Also, I think you should look at the carbon credit policy of our government. I think there are rules now in place for that. So, just one question here and then we'll come back to you. Can you get the mic here? We request you to kindly be very, very brief because we're running against time. Sure. No, please take the mic, sir. It's for the benefit of the audience.
Good evening to all the panelists. And I'm very happy whenever I hear about integration of livestock and agriculture. I myself, under Mr. Pradeep Burman, for the last 35 years, have worked on the sustainable integration of livestock and agriculture and convinced the government to bring out food security, fodder security, feed security, energy, that is fuel security, and fertilizer security using knowledge, science and technology. Now my question to Dr. Afroz is, quality, ethics and value creation is evaded from the system. As a result, the common man trust on the climate crisis management, sustainability, everything is eroded, and more so after the report comes, like 300 रुपए में देसी घी बिक रहा है. So my question to you is, sir, that you are so much knowledgeable and all the panelists, when are we going to create value in our agriculture, livestock, farming system for making villages truly sustainable and protected from the risk of climate assault? That's my question, sir.
You have raised to us, and I think that is the basis as far as India is concerned, especially the rural India. You have seen the impact of the corona pandemic when it has happened. Majority of the people from UP and Bihar who were working in Gujarat, in Maharashtra and all that, they moved to their villages, and it was alarming situations. That indicated that how many peoples have migrated from rural India to the cities for their livelihood. That was a turning point for each and everyone, and I really appreciate you that if the village is developed properly, no one would like to leave the village and go to the cities having serious problems of air pollution, sort of the problems, maybe the water quality problems, maybe the oxygen problems, maybe congestion, maybe disease, maybe health issues, whatever. But I think government is working very seriously for that to make self-sustainable the village ecosystem. Like, as you have rightly said, I worked with the Narmada and had the credit to work for more than 28 years to translate so many big dams in this country to reality. And I must say to you, 4 or 5 years back, when before coming here in a judicial position, I advised to the Prime Minister that in UP, large number of cattle and animals, the people have now abandoned it because the children who were taking care of animal husbandry and all that, they had already migrated to Bombay, Calcutta and all that. Why not, like Banas model, like Anand model, we should have a dairy system here. He, of course, I must say to you that he accepted that and he told it is a wonderful idea and a dairy system has already been established nearby Banaras and Jaunpur and other is also on the card. I told unless, like in Gujarat, I am narrating a very small story that if a farmer having 4 to 5 buffaloes or cows and he sells the milk and the people comes and collect the milks and given to particular point, immediately it comes in his mobile that how much milk you have sold, what was the fat content, what is the amount due in your bank account, and after 7 days the money goes to his bank. That has not been percolated in other part of the country. If you go to Silchar in Assam, you found the Amul butter, you find the Amul milk there also. So that is most important pressing problem you have raised, and I think government has to work very hard for that to make the villages self-sustainable. The villages, I think there is no people to take care of the animals. I am dealing some cases related to the Gaushala. Pathetic condition. There is no, I'm going to have a very, I'm not saying that that will be a landmark judgment, but definitely I'm trying to do that. There is no fodder in the village. There is no pasture land. The grazing land has been reduced. That has been converted for the benefit of the poor people to political bills, to have the oat system and all that. So this is the serious challenge that common property resource in the villages has been reduced. It has been only localized to nearby religious place, maybe Kabristan, graveyard, maybe temple, maybe mosque. Everything has been encroached. So I am raising all these questions and I hope we will come to have a guarantee of the fodder, have the guarantee of the animals milk marketing properly, so the rural system again can revive. And after that, I am sure that the people who belongs to the village, having 2 hectares or 1 hectare of land, he will definitely return back. Just you take example of Kerala. The people who are working in the government, maybe in the civil services also, after retirement, majority of the people goes back to there because of their quality and they are having best facilities. So that is very interesting and very important. And I was adjudicating also this air pollution issue and had discussed with the Air Pollution Commission. You will be surprised to know we were just blaming that the farmers are responsible for stubble burning. I raised a simple question in my training to United Nations in Germany 86-87. The Czechoslovakia and Germany border, we are having sensors. And that census at that point of time indicating the quality of the air, that is one place to other place, how it is moving. How we can blame the Punjab unless we should have the technology. The satellite technology is available, internet of theme is available, IoT is available. We have to use all these things in our adjudication also, as well as for the policy makers, that we have to fix responsibility when we are sure for that. So that is very important. I think rural India needs much more attention and it has to be developed. Rural technology is well known to the farmers and they should be involved in the policy planning, that what could be the best policy for the rural development in the country.
One last question
There's
there.
one last question.
Yeah, I think I can only take one question. And
Hi, my name is Kumar Sambhav. I am a journalist and founder of interdisciplinary research organization Land Conflict Watch. My question is to Mr. Bhushan and the Honorable Member of National Criminal Tribunal. We talked about the trade-offs in the context of the climate judgment by the Supreme Court, where we say that there shouldn't be a trade-off between one environmental aspect with the other. You know, if we look at the renewable energy projects, they are very land intensive and water intensive projects, and they are also taking over common property resources like anything. Unfortunately, we don't have a law in India which sort of recognizes rights of communities and villagers on traditional common property resources. And because of that reason, this takeover of commons has been a big problem with renewable energy projects as well as water-intensive, resource extraction. Now, when we talk about climate justice, we don't want to repeat the historical problems that were there with the extraction of fossil fuel-based industry, which caused displacement, which caused extraction of resources without including the local communities, etc. So, how, in the context of a climate law, we could address these issues, and we see that there is not even a social impact assessment or environmental impact assessment applicable to renewable energy projects. Same is happening with plantation, large-scale plantations, etc., etc. So this is the question that, can a climate law address the issues of social justice, ecological justice, and resource justice to all strata of societies? Thank you.
okay, so I will respond a part of that question myself. Being coming from a landlord family, actually the common lands, as the expert has mentioned, cannot be acquired by a third party unless the panchayat agrees to it. It's a common land of the panchayat and of the villagers. It's the interference, the external interference in that space which is causing that encroachment. I think that's the crux of the matter. I will leave, yes, Mr. Garg and Mr. Bhushan.
I'm intervening because I've been revenue officer for 16 years, starting from SDM to ADM and the district magistrate. You see, every village has something. In Madhya Pradesh, they call it Nistar Patrak. So the Nistar Patrak has well defined what is Kabristan, what is Shamshan Ghat, what is for Gochar or whatever, which is for, precious.
Grazing, pasture.
Yeah, grazing. Everything is well defined.
And the ponds.
Ponds is defined, even Chote Jhaad ke, Bade Jhaad ke jungle, which was a big issue in Madhya Pradesh. Because after this Godavan case, Chote Jhaad, Bade Jhaad ke jungle, where there was no jungle. It was just barren land which the villagers were using. They were not allowed to use it then. So Nistar Patrak is the basic document which has different name in different states. So one has to see that. And that land cannot be diverted, as rightly saying, by the panchayat's consent or the villagers of Gram Sabha's consent. They can go to the court and they can enforce the right.
Would you?
See, addressing climate change is about economic transition. The question is whether the transition is just, the justice element in the transition or not. Historically, every economic transition, when people moved from horse cart to automobile, it was an economic transition. It affected the horse car owner, the driver, the horses. Okay. The economic transition to solve climate change is so huge that it is a society-wide, economic-wide challenge. Every sector of economy will have to transition. Therefore, the concept of just transition will have to come. It should be inbuilt in our climate law. This is the kind of transition we want. Do we want to replace a coal-based power plant with 1,000 megawatt solar plant without understanding the environmental impact of 1,000 megawatt solar plant? There is an environmental impact. So solar plant, clean energy does not mean green energy. There is a difference between clean and green that needs to be understood very well. So my answer to you is that we need to have a legal framework for this transition. Justice has to be there. We have done a lot of historical injustice in land acquisition. whether it was for coal mining land acquisition or any mining land acquisition. We have to make sure that this transition that we are doing for climate change does not repeat that historical injustice. So that's how we will be able to solve some of the problems that are arising right now with climate change solutions.
Thank you very much. Can I request all of you to put your hands together for this very illustrious and erudite panel? My concluding remarks. I think human beings, you, me, and everyone who is around this forum today are responsible in terms of what course we want to chart for ourselves as human beings for this country and for the world around us, because this is an interdependent, transboundary world. I mean, you know, emissions in Africa affects other parts of the world, or vice versa for that matter. So I pen 2 lines for all of you for your kind consideration. Please bear with me, they are in Hindi. पेड़ काटने वाले को तो ये मालूम भी था, पेड़ काटने वाले को ये मालूम भी था कि जिस्म जल जाएंगे, कि जिस्म जल जाएंगे जब सर पर साया ना होगा। पेड़ काटने वाले को पता था, मालूम था कि जिस्म जल जाएंगे जब सर पर साया ना होगा, और शोर यूं ही ना परिंदों ने मचाया था, और शोर यूं ही ना परिंदों ने मचाया होगा जब जंगल की तरफ शहर से कोई आया होगा। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Thank you very much for a very enlightening panel discussion. I thank all the esteemed panelists for their time. There were lots of questions from young lawyers. Maybe if the panelists agree, maybe during dinner, you could perhaps take it up with them. I'd now like to invite Dr. Aditya Joshi, advisor, Mobius Foundation, to please come and felicitate Mr. Chandrabhushan and Dr. Afroz Ahmed, please. Thank you. Can we please? Apologies for the slight delay. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to felicitate Dr. Afroz Ahmed. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. I'd now like to request Dr. Rambhuj, advisor, Mobius Foundation, to please felicitate Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay and our moderator, Jitinder Chima. Thank you so much. I'd now like to invite these young lawyers from ELG Foundation, Mansi and Isha, to please felicitate President Mobius Foundation, Mr. Praveen Garg. Thank you so much. I once again would like to express my gratitude on behalf of the Mobius Foundation and ELD Foundation to all the panelists for your time and for a very stimulating, enlightening discussion debate. Thank you so much. And thank you all. I'd like to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being so patient, and to all the law students from the various law colleges, thank you so much for taking time out. Dinner will now be served, and please enjoy your evening. Thank you.